begin our cylinder, we'll either trace a circle or draw one with the compass, measure the diameter of the circle and times that by pi to find the length of the slab that you'll need. This will be the length of the bottom of the slab. So if you want a cylinder that is just straight up and down, this can also be the length of the top. If you want one that's slightly leaning in or slightly leaning out, you'll have to adjust for that. Be sure to use a ruler and be as accurate as possible for this step, because this will be the piece of paper that you place onto the clay and cut your slab from, so you want it to be exactly the size that you need. Once you have the template created for the bottom and the sides of your cylinder, you can trace the shape for the side of your cylinder onto a separate paper, or you can just draw on that one. So it's up to you if you want to do two separate ones, one for the sketch of how you want your design to look with your sgraffito. You can trace it on a separate paper and draw it on there. Here you can see me designing what I want my sgraffito to look like. So once I paint my underglaze onto my leather hard cylinder, this is what I'll be carving into it. Now I'm ready to begin preparing my slab for the side of the cylinder and for the base. So I'm beginning by flattening my bit of clay with the palm of my hand, and I'm thinking about the shape that I'm going to need that slab to be. So I'm kind of forming it slowly so that when I do roll it out, it's not just a big blob, that it kind of matches the shape that I need it to be once it's as flat as it needs to be. So you can see I'm slowly flipping and flattening and then checking it with my template. And this will allow me to roll slightly sideways to make adjustments if it needs to be a bit wider or a bit different shape. And that way I don't have it completely rolled out and then it's not big enough to support the shapes that I need it to be. Now I'm double checking to make sure that my templates fit. And then I'm also checking the surface for any air pockets. So if I notice any little bubbles poking up, I can poke those with a pin tool and then roll them gently with a rolling pin to squeeze the air out if there's any trapped air. So now my slab is rolled evenly and the surface is smooth, so I'm laying my templates on, and now I am ready to cut my slab shapes. So I'm going to use a cutting tool straight up and down, go nice and slow along the edges, make sure I'm pulling the tool towards my body so I can get a nice straight line. I've got the most control that way. I'm going to keep that extra clay that I'm trimming off because I might need a little bit just to fill in any little gaps. I'm just going to keep that wet and workable. So as soon as I get all the excess clay trimmed off, I'll wrap that up so it stays wet. You'll notice my method here for cutting my circle. I'm not trying to drag my cutting tool around the circle. That would be very hard to cut. So I'm actually rotating my slab and cutting it off in straight lines. So I'm creating kind of like an octagon-ish, but not perfectly. And then once I have it pretty much the size I need, now I'm just going back and kind of cutting off any little excess pieces that are hanging off. This is the easiest way to cut a circle. And then once I get it pretty circle-ish, I'm going to prop it up on its edge and just roll it to round any little angular spots that are still left behind. And I can also smooth those with my finger. Before we assemble our cylinder and take our slab and attach it to our base, we'll need to make sure that the clay is strong enough to be able to hold its shape when we set it up on its edge. We'll need to let that slab dry out a little bit, not as much as we did for our slab boxes, but just a little so that when we set it up on its side, it can hold its shape and it doesn't slouch and fall over. So I've got mine setting on some plaster now just to help it dry out a little tiny bit. And while I'm doing that, I'm just writing my name and the year on the bottom of my piece so I don't forget later. And after this is a little bit more dry, then I'll be able to assemble it. And now that it's a little bit dried out, I'm using a damp sponge just to clean up any rough areas. I'm also using a rib tool just to help smooth out any little irregular areas or cracks. And now I'm taking my slab and I'm just kind of doing that dry fit again, just like we did for our slab boxes, just to make sure everything fits together. So I'm taking my slab, I'm wrapping it around the base, And clay has a memory, so it's gonna remember this shape, even though I've gotta lay it back down to score it before I put it all together. It will remember this shape and it will come back together a little easier. So I'm just kind of doing a dry fit, making sure that nothing needs to be trimmed or adjusted. I'm also checking for any areas that might need to be smoothed. It's a little hard for me to fit my hand inside of this size, so it's easier to do smoothing and cleaning up now before I connect it all together. Everything looks like it's fitting together really well, so now I'm ready to disassemble and score the areas that are going to be touching. So I'm roughing up along the bottom edge. I'll rough and score along the outside edge of my circle so that that bottom edge can stick to it. And then I will rough up the seam where the two sides of the slab will come together and join. And now I'm ready to apply my slip. And I only have to apply the slip to one part of the two pieces that are going to come together, and I'm being very careful not to smooth out all that roughness that I just created, so I'm just plopping the slip along those two seams. I'm going to focus on the bottom first, make sure that's really pressed and wiggled together and joining together, and then I'll focus on that side seam and really help it come together. So I'm supporting from the inside, I'm pulling those two parts and pushing them together. Last step for this slab cylinder is just to clean everything up. So anywhere there's stress cracks, anywhere the seams are still showing, I'm going to use a rib tool, a paintbrush to get down deep inside because my hand won't fit. So I'm using that to clean up the bottom seam. I'll use a rib tool to smooth out any of those areas where they join together to try to make them more invisible, so we shouldn't be able to see where that seam originally was. The rib tool also works great for any stress cracks that were created when we took the slab and wrapped it around the base. And don't forget to check the bottom seam as well. We want to make sure that that's really nice and strong and blended. So flip your whole slab over and check that area as well. Your final step is just to look for any seams that are still visible and take that rib tool and smooth them out. We want to be able to not even tell where those two areas came together.